So there's a remarkable verse in the Dhammapada, at least was remarkable for me in that I spent a lot of time considering and reflecting on it. And the verse goes this way. Don't give up your own welfare for the sake of others' welfare, however great. Clearly know your own welfare and be intent on the highest good. So when I first saw this verse, it kind of stopped me. Really? Is this really right? Don't give up your own welfare for the sake of others' welfare, no matter how great. And I certainly had received a message through growing up in all kinds of ways of the importance of caring for other people, and the idea that not being selfish and not prioritizing oneself, and certainly there must be hugely important things in the world to care for, to meet, to fix, that it's certainly worthy of sacrificing my own welfare for, and that's maybe is appropriate. But this verse by the Buddha says differently. So it would seem that this is kind of a selfish message, and in fact it's in a chapter of the Dhammapada that is titled Oneself. And it has some other nice verses in it. By oneself alone is evil done. Born of oneself, produced by oneself, it grinds down those devoid of wisdom as a diamond grinds down a gem. So in terms of you yourself, the responsibility, if you only you do evil. It's a powerful word. You don't, not other people, isn't other people who trick you into it or, force you into it. And then the second verse is, oneself indeed is one's own protector. What other protector could there be? With self-control, one gains a protector hard to obtain. So these are all messages about kind of oneself, importance of oneself. And so it could seem like a very strong individualistic message, a strong individualism here about you, yourself, about the person. And is Buddhism, is teachings of the Buddha, individualistic? Is it a form of self-preoccupation? And I don't know if it's self-preoccupation, but is it kind of does it have a very strong individualistic flavor or approach to it? And I think the answer is yes, no, yes and no, maybe, it depends. And then there's another story of wonderful story I find kind of delightful, that there are a group of 3 disciples of the Buddha, 3 monks, who are in a small park, woodland park, little forest, that's protected or cared for by a park keeper or someone. And they're there practicing, living in this little woodland. And the Buddha is also wandering around, and he comes to this woodland and maybe he thinks it's a place to spend the night or sit and meditate or something. And so he starts walking into it. And the park keeper says to him, wait a minute, you can't go in here. There are these other disciples of the Buddha in there who are meditating and should be left alone. The part of the delight of this is that the story is that the park keeper doesn't recognize the Buddha as the Buddha. And there's a couple of stories where that happens. Someone doesn't recognize the Buddha. And I just delight in this because, there is a kind of hagiography or idealization of the Buddha where he just, radiates light and kind of floats and, is, just, you would recognize the Buddha a mile away, you'd be blinded and here this, he doesn't recognize him, and so it's kind of a nice story. But there's also, I think, something metaphoric about this story, that there's something about not recognizing the Buddha, which says something very profound about how someone who's awake shows up, and there's something not to be recognized there, to be seen. So, but then these three disciples of the Buddha, monks, hear what's going on, and they come out and say, "Oh, but parkkeeper, this is our teacher. Please let him come in." So the Buddha comes in, and the first thing he asks his disciples is, "Are you getting enough food? Are you comfortable here in your dwelling?" And they say, "Yes." So he asks about their physical situation. "Yes, we're comfortable. We're getting enough food." And then he asks them, "How are you living together?" "I hope that you are all living in concord, with mutual appreciation, without disputing, blending like milk and water, viewing each other with kindly eyes." It's a nice, beautiful kind of expression of living together in harmony. And this expression, living together like milk and water, the opposite of that would be living together like oil and water. Oil and water separates, milk just dissolves into the water and becomes indistinguishable. And this idea that these three were living together kind of like milk and water is represented in the sutta, is that the Buddha refers to all three of them by the name of one of them. So it's a little unusual, but kind of maybe also metaphorically they're all in it together. And then they say, "Yes, we are living in concord with mutual appreciation, without disputing, blending like milk and water, viewing each other with kindly eyes." And the Buddha says, the name the Buddha uses, Anurodha. "But Anurodha, how do you live thus?" "Venerable Sir, so as to that, I think thus. It is a gain for me, it is a great gain for me, that I am living with such companions in the holy life. I maintain bodily acts of loving kindness towards those venerable ones, both openly and privately. I maintain verbal acts of loving kindness towards them both openly and privately. I maintain mental acts of loving kindness towards them both openly and privately. I consider, why should I not set aside what I wish to do and do what these venerable ones wish to do? Then I set aside what I wish to do and do what these venerable ones wish to do. We are different in body, Venerable Sir, but one in mind." So here's an example of people living together in community in a very intimate, close way, so close that they feel like they're one in mind. And they're caring for each other, and they're putting aside their own personal wishes for the welfare of the group. So is Buddhism really a form of, not individualism, but is it a form of collectivism or groupism? Or is altruism and compassion and being a caretaker of the wider community the important part of what Buddhism really emphasizes? And the answer is yes, no, yes and no, maybe, it depends. And we find that different people enter the Dharma, enter Buddhism through different doors. And perhaps two big gates that maybe it's exist are some people enter it through the door of individualism, their own practice. And some people enter it through the door of community, of being part of community and collective. And there are different forms of Buddhism also that specialize in these different doors. And probably it's fair to say that for the most part, this more kind of Buddhism that has developed here in the West, especially our kind of Vipassana Buddhism, that's still remains fairly predominantly white and Protestant kind of acculturated kind of thing. It has a kind of strong individualistic flavor, I think. IMC, even still here at IMC, I think, even though other groups, other Vipassana groups look at IMC and see, oh boy, there's a lot of community here. We have a lot of community values, and our retreat center is set up to be very community kind of oriented compared to other places. But still, it has that flavor. And it makes some sense because we're a meditation center, and meditation is usually done, even if it's done together in groups, we close our eyes, and a lot of it is internally focused. So this center of focus and attention is here in this person. But there are other quite wonderful Buddhist groups that emphasize community and being together in community, practicing in community. And a very important part of my own practice has been, in fact, practicing in community. And a lot of the ways that I've grown in the Dharma, a lot of the ways that I've become freer and wiser and more compassionate happened because I was practicing in community and situations where it wasn't as dramatic as blending on milk and water, but where clearly putting aside my own wishes and caring for others was an important part of the growth and development of myself and learning how not to be concerned so much. And so there's different doors to go through. And but I think both doors, regardless of which door we go through, it isn't like one is maybe better than the other, but it's a door that goes into the practice. And if we do the practice, then we find that this separation or this strong distinction between self and other, the way that's I've set it up here, begins to dissolve. And one of the beginning places for that is in following the Eightfold Path. There's a somewhat famous in Buddhist circles little story where Ananda, Buddha's main kind of attendant for many years, comes to the Buddha and says, Venerable Sir, I think the whole holy life, the whole practice is having, he says, half the holy life is having good spiritual friends. And the Buddha says, don't say that. It's the whole spiritual life is having good spiritual friends. But then Buddha goes on to explain that a little bit. And he says, because if someone has a good spiritual friend, that person will encourage you to engage in the Eightfold Path. And this encouragement to be on the path, the Eightfold Path, is kind of one of the important roles of being in community or have teachers. This is important. This is a way of living. This is what supports. And the Eightfold Path has a delightful, I think a profound, balance between paying attention to oneself and paying attention and caring for the community. These two, I see them as integrated in the Eightfold Path itself. Because it begins by having right view, and that's up to you, the perspective that you have. And only you can be responsible for your perspective that you live by. So it's something that's fairly individualistic, that you take responsibility for it, about how you show up and how you see the world. But then the next 4 factors of the Eightfold Path have a lot to do with how we live in community. that we live in community with compassion and loving kindness, that we live in community without lying, without using abusive speech, that we have kind speech, supportive speech, true speech, that we live in community without harming other people through any kind of physical harm or verbal harm, or we don't take things from people, we don't steal from people, we don't engage in sexual misconduct. There are various ways that can harm people. And that's caring for the community around us. And it's caring for oneself. And then we also have what's called right livelihood. That we have a livelihood, a profession, we have a way of living. Livelihood means kind of the way in which we're supported in our life, whether we work or not. That's way of living doesn't harm other people, doesn't harm people around us or harm ourselves. And then the last 3 steps of the Eightfold Path comes back to be very personal. It's really kind of monitoring your own mind, your own heart, and caring for it. No one else can care for your quality of your mind, the quality of your heart, as well as yourself. In fact, if you depend on other people to act just right, to behave just right to you, so that your inner life can be well and happy and free, you're really not free. You're actually the danger is if you do too much of that, and to use dramatic Buddhist language, you become a slave or in bondage to the world around you. So taking responsibility for this mind and this heart of ours is something that really is up to us. And, maybe I should have asked for forgiveness for the example I'm going to use, but it's, it's like no one else can pee for you. Some things you have to do for yourself. So the idea that, caring for your own mind is something only you can do for yourself. So there is certain things which are done generally in an individualistic way, right? Like peeing. Collective peeing, I guess, is possible. But and so it's appropriate to kind of have sometimes an orientation in certain areas of life to be just, here for me, this here. That we do certain things alone. And this caring for our own mind and hearts is something that we care for and take care of. And so the last 3 factors of the Eightfold Path is really about this, looking at it. And we do it in community. It's been very important, as I said, part of my life to be practicing in community. So here's a little story, or a little idea about that. For over 40 years now, I have regularly, a lot, gone to places to meditate with people. Just like all of us here today came here in order to meditate. So I've been doing this, for 40 years. And I started off in college, where I would go twice a week to a small sitting group, Tuesdays and Thursday evenings. And I would bike there on my bike and go sit for the evening and then go home. And I've done this, I've walked to places, I've driven my car to places, I've gone on airplanes to go to places to meditate, in Asia, all kinds. I've done, a lot of this going to meditate thing. And when I was in college, one of the things I discovered was an interesting maybe irony or something that is. So I was going to meditate, where the idea was to really be present for this experience and perhaps be non-reactive, to be settled, calm. And then I would jump on my bike, and I would sometimes be in a hurry, not settled. I got to get there on time. This is important, that's where it's important, where I'm going. That's where I'll do this wonderful thing, biking my... And at some point I realized, wait a minute, Gil. why is the going there not the place where I begin? And so I learned very quickly that the going to the meditation group shouldn't be the place where the exception to doing the practice. Shouldn't what's the point of not, of getting stressed so you can de-stress? It's kind of, it doesn't really make sense, right? Might as well not have gone in the first place. And so I learned that how I went to these places was the practice. I could take that as the practice. And so I'd arrive, and I used to feel kind of amazed after a while, where I came to this group in college, and I would already feel somewhat concentrated and settled because I gave myself to the biking as part of the practice. And periodically through the years, this little tension between getting there quickly to the place I'm going to meditate, or coming to IMC, and I got to hurry because I said, wait a minute, Gil, this is not about hurrying. This is about practicing being present. There's no need to sacrifice my well-being, my welfare, so that I can be here on time. Maybe that's what goes against the purpose of what we're doing here. So then on yesterday, I was in the supermarket shopping, and I had I gathered the food I went to buy. And I went to the checkout area, and there were a lot of people yesterday in the store, and so there were a lot of lines. So I did the reasonable thing. I looked up and down and thought, well, where's, probably the best line, quickest line to stand in, the one that has the shortest line or something. So I chose one. Very quickly understood that this was the slowest line. But I'd been standing there for a minute or two already, and so I could see that I had a choice. Standing there, I was very happy. I was kind of like a little bit in awe at the colors and the place and the abundance of stuff and the world that was coming and going in the market. And it turned out that it's a very high ceiling in this market. And there's something for me about high ceilings and lots of space, which kind of is I don't know what the right thing to say is, but kind of like a mirror for the mind, awareness, which is open and spacious, and it's lots of space for things. And so by the time I realized I was in a slow line, I was very content. I was just there, present for the situation. So then I realized I was standing in the slow line. And then I saw that I had a choice. I could contract, get impatient, start searching the other lines and calculating and evaluating those those checkout people and that line and how much is in their shopping bag, and just kind of like do the hunt for something quicker, because I could think well, I have important things to do. I have a list of errands, I have things I have to do. I have to get to places, and I have to. There's a lot of important things, So I had a choice of whether to give up being content and present, or getting all preoccupied about how to do this as quickly as I can, and really focus on this problem solving of how to get the best line. But the state of kind of being content and open and present, and mind expansive that I had, to me, at that point, this felt like a great treasure. It felt like one of the best treasures that I have. It's not incidental. It's not unimportant. In fact, I've learned it's one of the best things going, most important things going. on all kinds of levels. In the present moment, it was very pleasant, very enjoyable, very nice. On a deep psychological level, it felt it was so good not to be involved in being preoccupied in my thoughts, not be contracted, not be racing ahead. On a social level, it felt really healthy to be there and being attentive to the community of people I was in the store with, taking in the checkout clerk and the other persons in front of me in line and the other people, what goes on around me. And it felt like also in a more global way, I was taking in other information. I was taking in, they had all these kind of, impulse buy things, as you go out. But, I would look and say, wow, a lot of this is chocolate. And where does chocolate come from? And who grows the chocolate? And is this fair trade chocolate? And, how is it that through this shopping I'm connected to this wider world? So these thoughts would go through my mind. And it felt healthy to have this, that in this open, contented, present play. I was tuning into my environment and what was going on in a nice way. If I had been caught up in those thoughts about fast, other errands, what I have to do, I would have lost that. So I wasn't going to sacrifice my welfare, sacrifice this goodness, this healthy place I was in for something else. The Buddha has a teaching. I think it's one of those pithy teachings that it's good to remember and somehow contend with. And that is, nothing whatsoever is worth clinging to. To reword it, nothing whatsoever is worth becoming contracted by. Nothing whatsoever is worth becoming agitated or worked up with. Those are powerful statements if we have a tendency to get contracted or to cling or get worked up or excited. So, to focus on this, not being contracted, not clinging, not giving up this nice state that we're in, is that selfish? Is that excessively individualistic? It can't be, because selfishness is one of those contractions. Selfishness is one of those tightness and clinging. It is one of those agitations of the mind. And it's not sustainable if we really settle back and relax and open and see what's going on. And if the direction we're going is towards peace or to non-clinging. And so and then that state of non-clinging, the uncontracted place of the heart, is it appropriate to give it up for the welfare of others? Is it appropriate to give it up, because other people's needs are greater than our own? Before I answer that question directly, I'll give an analogy. And that is, someone has great compassion for people who swim, and especially children who learn to swim at the beach and all that. So the person decides, this summer I'm going to be a lifeguard. That seems really important to all these, thousands of kids on the beach, and it's dangerous out there in the water and big waves, and I'm going to be a lifeguard. And I have to do it right away, because this is important. But the person doesn't know how to swim. First, that person better learn to swim. Learning to swim is kind of an individualistic thing. You have to master it for your own self. And once it's mastered as a personal skill, then the person can be a lifeguard. But don't, be a lifeguard before you learn to swim, please. That's not going to be good for them or for you. So this idea of, there is a kind of individualistic kind of skill or connection to something we're developing in the Dharma. And it's something we want to develop first, or to say it differently, it's a wonderful foundation for how then we're going to live in the world and care for the world, how we're going to blend like milk and water, how we're going to look at each other in kindly eyes, how we're going to have mutual appreciation for each other, how we know when it's appropriate to give up our own wishes for the wishes of others. And it becomes the reference point, or the background, or the foundation is this place of freedom and ease and non-clinging, settledness, this amazing treasure, the greatest wealth you can ever have in your life, the wealth that's portable, the wealth that no one can really take away from you, the wealth that only you can destroy. And that is the wealth of a free heart, free mind, a wealth of a settled, contented, non-clinging state of being. Some people hear this and they don't trust it. They feel like, no, this can't be good enough. This is, selfish. It's about myself. And there's important things to do in the world. I have to care. I have to be involved. I have to get contracted. I have to be angry. I have to be distressed. I have to, there's all these very strong sources, the messages in our own mind and from society, very strong authoritative opinions that exist in us, exist in our society, for the importance of giving up our relaxed, open, settled, non-clinging state. Because it's so important to take care of what's in the world, so important to respond and act and get or do whatever, that it's appropriate to get contracted. It's appropriate to cling. It's appropriate to get agitated. It's appropriate to be distressed. We should be. We're supposed to be. They want us to be. We have to be. And we do that, and then we become like a lifeguard who's forgotten how to swim. That's, don't go to the beach when the lifeguard's forgotten how to swim. But what is possible is to really trust this place of non-clinging. And the way to learn to trust it is to learn to move into the world, act in the world, begin being in the world. Don't just, avoid the world. And then allow the response to the world to come from that place. And a tremendous amount of good can be done in the world, tremendous action, a lot of effort and energy can go into bettering the world and responding to it, taking care of our neighbors, our family, and everything from this place. It's not like either or. It's actually, ideally, it's both. And that's why the Buddha could say, don't give up your own welfare for the welfare of others, no matter how great. Because the greatest welfare doesn't have to be sacrificed in caring for the welfare of others. If you really know that, if you clearly understand what's the best for you, stay close to it. And that becomes the door, the vehicle, the means, the medium by which we respond. To not respond to the needs of the world in some way or other is probably there, we're not responding because there is some clinging. There is some way we're closed down or shut off or not paying attention. But to allow the response, our response to the world, come from the heart rather than the mind, to come from a non-clinging place rather than a clinging place, makes it feel that there's no self here. It's not about me. Certainly, it's our response, but it's hard to kind of take possession of it or identify with it and congratulate myself. Look how great I am. Because the place of non-clinging, there's not room for that. You wouldn't recognize, it's not a place where you recognize yourself in the egotistical way, or as, firm place. And that's why I like to think when the Buddha came to this little woodland and the park keeper didn't recognize the Buddha, there was nothing to recognize in the conventional way. So, don't give up your own welfare for the welfare of others, no matter how great. It's not meant to be a selfish teaching. I like to think of it, it really is the opposite. Because the greatest welfare for yourself is inseparable to the greatest welfare for all. Or to be able to connect to that or meet that in an important way. So that's, and you might not like this little teaching. You might have all kinds of protests and, questioning it. And I think that's really good. I think this particular teaching, don't give up your own welfare for the welfare of others, no matter how great, is a wonderful little kind of portable saying that's good to be in discussion with, and to argue with, and to debate with, and question, and how does this work, and bounce off, and let it be a mirror, and really to really look deeply, and let it be a way of looking more deeply into what makes you tick and operate and see yourself. So you don't have to agree, but I encourage you to engage in it. So, my friends, thank you for coming.